Now that our environment is set up, let's start coding. This is where I differ from other instructors. Every tutorial I saw immediately started talking about dependency injection or inversion of control. These are concepts that aren't going to make sense to a new Spring Boot developer. It's like when you were first learning Java and someone tried to explain to you public static void main string args for the first time.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
So instead, we're jumping straight into our first REST controller. And FYI, I assume you already have a basic understanding of front-end versus back-end, HTTP requests, and JSON, but you don't need to be an expert. Okay, so open your project, go back to your main method, no BS Spring Boot application, and right off the bat, you'll notice something a little different than a traditional Java project. So this is annotated with Spring Boot application. Spring Boot likes to use annotations, and it's in the form of an @ symbol. So we'll be using a bunch of these as we go through our project. So the first thing we want to do is create a REST controller. This is the location of an endpoint. So File, New Java class. This is just like a normal Java class. We're going to call it Product Controller. Now, since this is a controller, we need to tell Spring Boot that it needs to act in that manner. So we're going to annotate it with @REST controller. And it auto-imported for us. We're also going to add a request mapping. And then we're also going to add /products. This tells it where to go. So if an endpoint is called at the location @products, then this is where it will route to. So our application is going to be CRUD based. So create, read, update, and delete. And these correspond with the HTTP methods post, get, put, and delete. So we're going to start with just one of them now. We're going to do a get mapping. So we're going to annotate @get mapping. And then the way this works is right after the get mapping is going to be a plain old Java method. Public, it's going to return a string, get product. It's going to take no parameters, at least not yet. And I want to do two things. First, I'm going to do system.out.println get products method. And for now, we're just going to return a string get products endpoint. Okay, so now we should be ready to actually ping this. So let's go ahead and run it. One thing to note in the terminal is that if you scroll up, you can see it's using Tomcat and it's using localhost. And there it is. So it's on port 8080, which is the default one for Java Spring Boot. So let's go over to Postman. And we're going to need to create a new workspace. So I go up here, create a workspace. This will be called no BS. Create. No BS. I'm going to make it personal. And we want to create a new collection. This will be a pseudo Amazon app. So we'll call it Amazon. And we're going to add a request. Okay, here's our actual request. So get product. This is where we select what type of HTTP request we're going to make. And it's nice and color coded. So we're going to keep it a get. And then because we're using localhost, you want to come in here and do localhost :8080/products. And since it is currently running, hopefully this will return our method. And there it is, get products endpoint. And it's also returning a status of 200, We'll talk about that more in a second. One more thing to think about is once that method was hit, it did print out to the console. So our print line statement still prints out to the console even in Java Spring Boot, and our return statement is actually what gets returned when you ping it. So let's cover a couple more things that we'll be using a lot. First off, typically people don't return strings, but you can. For now, let's change it to ResponseEntity. And we're going to say return ResponseEntity dot OK means a status of 200. So we'll say OK. And for now, let's just return an empty list. So we'll say collections dot empty list. Now, if I go back and ping it, it's not going to work. It's going to return the same thing. That's because we need to stop it and restart the application. So stop, restart. Okay, try it again. There we go, empty list. So this response entity is what we're going to be using, and it allows us to control how we respond. So we can give it the body. This is the body, and then the response can be done in a number of different ways. So if we do return response entity dot status, and I prefer to use HTTP status. And with this, instead of remembering the numbers, you can just pass in the enumeration. So created, okay, not found, that's a 404. Bad gateway, bad request. So there's a whole bunch of different options. Let's just do for now, not found. And we'll do a body still with a collections.emptylist. We have to restart our application. Okay. And there we go. We can see our status. It's now a 404 not found and an empty list. So that is how we have explicit control over all of the things that we're going to want to do in Java Spring Boot. Okay, that gets us started. On the next installment, we're going to actually create the table in our database and start reading and writing from our table. Okay.